What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a comedic spin on all the goings-on in the world. My name is Jacob Paveo, and I, of course, come to you from the Great White North on all podcast services every Wednesday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, an episode on YouTube gets posted Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Please tell your friends about the podcast if you haven't already. And if it's your first time here, shout out to you. Thank you so much for checking us out. You can also grab any merch you want. I have my mug. I've been talking about this for a few weeks. I finally got my Laugh to Learn mug, and I wanted to be drinking out of it today, but I used it last night, so it's actually in the dishwasher right now because they're dishwasher safe. And it was pretty sick. I think the mugs are, I want to say, like $15 Canadian. So that's a pretty sweet deal. That's delivered to your door. You know what I mean? It's if you go to Walmart and you want to buy a decent mug, it's like $20. This one's like $15, and it's got the podcast logo on it, and we deliver it to your door. It'll take roughly about 3 weeks to get there if you live in Canada, or the U.S., actually, as long as you're on the mainland. If you live in Alaska or Hawaii, it may take a little bit longer, but shout out to you, because, I mean, especially if you're in Hawaii. If you're in Alaska, I feel you. We've got a lot of snow right now. I live in central Ontario. If you're in Hawaii, shout out to you, because you're balling in the sunshine. This week, I was not prepared. I didn't prepare my voice. This week, I am asking the question, is it beneficial to buy product made entirely in your own country? We hear it all the time, right? Especially right now. You know, buy Canadian, buy American. And my brother and sister-in-law are starting a fully buy Canadian business right now, producing baby clothes. And in fact, we are actually sponsored this week by said business, A1 Baby. That's EHONE, A1 Baby, who you can find all of their information for in the description for this episode. Go. They're opening in about a week or two. Again, follow them on social media. Hook your baby up so that they are looking good. Or your friend's baby. Maybe you don't have a baby, but your friend's got a baby. Or your brother or your sister or your aunt. And your aunt's baby, maybe she has horrible fashion choices, okay? I'm just going to throw it out there, right? We all have an aunt who wears a polka dot dress with striped leggings. And you can't let her little baby be dressed by her. So you need to go to A1 Baby, follow them on social media. Very soon you'll be able to order their entirely produced in Canada products. So needless to say, this idea of buying sort of local, buying within your country, has been on my mind lately. But if you read or watch European and Asian news, they have a very different opinion that essentially this will ultimately harm your economy long term if this is undertaken. So let's explore that together. This week on, you guys already know where you are. It's the Laugh to Learn podcast. Oh, and Trump was not impeached by the Senate. Hey, check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast! The recent rise in the West of buying product developed within your own country, or rather the re-emergence of this former post-war effort, even has me wrapped up in it. As of this month, or as of February 2nd specifically, all of our clothing is produced by a wage-paying Honduras business, so they're producing our t-shirts and sweaters. It's then being shipped where the logos are being designed and printed right here at a place in Ontario. So it's not entirely Canadian, but we're supporting a democratic country in Honduras who needs high-paying jobs. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, of course, as well as then supporting Canadian employees who are actually able to work through this pandemic in a print shop, printing the T-shirts, mugs, stickers, etc. But as mentioned before, many places around the world are strongly opposed to a focus on buying goods manufactured within your borders. A recent article in The Economist was titled, quote, "The Folly of Buy American," end quote. In the article, which was actually placed right near the front of the magazine, it was like the second article in it. So they're really pushing this forward. And The Economist is a European magazine. They speak of how federal laws have caused increased markups on foreign goods, leading to less importation and causing smaller nations and economies to suffer by being driven out of the American market. So basically, what it's doing, this particular article was directed towards the U.S., but Canadian policy is very similar, and Mexico as well is starting to get similar policy to this. And basically, what it comes down to is the government is allowing us as citizens, like here in Canada, living within Canada, and Americans living within the U.S., it's allowing us to have options to buy locally. Because, for example, here in Ontario, minimum wage is, I think, $15 an hour, right? Minimum wage in a place like China, there literally isn't one. And you can get away with paying, like, literally at 1 American cent a day, 10 American cents a day, right, to produce product. That means the cost of that product is literally, like one T-shirt can literally be like $4 or $5 cheaper to produce in China per T-shirt than here, just based on labor alone, right? For the manufacturing. Then you talk about shipping. Well, if you're shipping something from China, you also don't have to pay labor in shipping. It doesn't exist. You don't have to pay for it. It's like 10 cents per person per day, right? Whereas here, it's still $15 per person per hour, right? So, you know, an 8-hour day, you're talking about like $110, $120 a day that employees are earning here, as opposed to 10 cents a day in China. And I'm just picking on China because it's a communist government, and I don't believe in communism or any sort of dictatorship. But it's just what it does is it drives people who live here to have the ability to buy local product because you're allowed to mark up imported product significantly. Now, as mentioned before, many places around the world, right, are strongly opposed to this idea. But the counterpoint made by advocates of these buy-at-home policies is that it creates and supports local jobs and drives innovation. Now, it may seem like a ridiculous argument to have right now at a time where people are struggling to pay bills and eat because they've been out of work for nearly a year, right? It may seem a little ridiculous for us to talk about this, like there's bigger issues in the world than how much it costs to produce a T-shirt. But with Biden's recent win, he did something that was, in my opinion, so ridiculous that it absolutely needs pointing out. Because after months of everyone on the left saying that Donald Trump's America First policy was racist, xenophobic, and even so far as to say that it was unconstitutional because he had increased taxes on some product being imported. And by the way, this hurt Canadians. Like, this is something that I didn't like, but I was never against an America First policy because I am for a Canada First policy, if you will. But after saying that Trump's policy was racist, xenophobic, and unconstitutional, Joe Biden came out with an equivalent policy that instead of calling it America First, he called it Buy America, B-U-Y, America. His Buy America policy, which all things considered was the exact same, just with a different name. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, could you imagine if after bin Laden died, Obama walked out onto that podium at the press conference that we all remember and said, "We got him. And now I'd like to propose a Christian caliphate where we allow former members of radical groups to convert to Christianity or we will cut their heads off." Can you imagine if he came out on television and said that? No, because it's absolutely ridiculous that for years and years and years you're pointing at this one group who everyone agrees with is a bad group and saying they're wrong. You can't kill their leader, almost get rid of all of them, and then say, now we're going to do the same thing, right? You can't do that. But for some reason, that's what Biden has gotten away with. And this, it's the same level of stupidity that we're dealing with here and now. And don't worry, I'm going to come back to the policy and its impacts, but we just need to take this moment to appreciate just how tribal things are when Trump and Biden can say the exact same thing. Like, when I say these are identical policies, I mean like you and I going through this would not be able to find a difference. There are some policy experts and tax experts that are like, oh yeah, there's some saving here and some more expensive things over here in trade that are changing. But for the most part, these are identical policies with a different name. The only difference, other than the name itself, is the person who proposed it. And the country does a full swing towards and away from supporting essentially the exact same idea. Republicans who like a month ago were completely anti-foreign trade, and the Democrats who were completely pro-foreign completely pro-foreign trade and we need to open up our borders and everything, they've switched. And now the Democrats are saying, no, buy America, and the Republicans are saying, no, we need to buy from the EU and our allies. It's absolutely preposterous. That's the only way that I can describe it. But either way, I don't want to focus on the politics of it. I just wanted to point that out. Here we are left with a legitimate question. Should we support this buy-at-home policy, and what, if any, impact does it have on a country and its economy, specifically our country and our economy? Now, again, you can probably guess where I stand on this, as I do pay a little bit more to have product produced or at least printed here in Canada, and I don't deal at all with China or any, my product doesn't get handled through any communist countries, and I try to do that to the best of my ability so that we can let freedom reign. But either way, let's get to it. So first, I want to talk about the pros. Now, it seems like going through a bunch of different reports on this and reading some economic forums, there are three things it comes down to that in support of buying within your country. So number one is a healthy consumer. So essentially, when you buy something manufactured within your country, you know that it is following all of your country's guidelines. So, for example, buying something produced here in Canada or in the US, we know it doesn't have lead paint in it, right? We don't allow lead paint to be used. We've seen in recent years examples of toys manufactured in China that are distributed here that then get recalled because they have lead paint in them. And, everyone knows that lead paint, probably not a good thing for a kid to be licking off of their toy cars or whatever the heck it happens to be. I say toy cars because I think that's what it was when I was a kid that had a big lead paint recall. So things like that, right? Certain materials that are maybe really cheap that would be used in a T-shirt in some places that here we simply don't allow them to be used because, yes, although the company gets to save money, if you can only wear the T-shirt once, well, it doesn't help the consumer. So a healthy consumer is the first and foremost reason, actually, that everyone relates to, which I thought was surprising because I thought it would be the economy, but the economy is actually the third thing that's often mentioned. Number two caught me off guard, and especially because I'm looking right now at specifically a conservative website. But the second thing that's mentioned is the environment. because the environmental impact of producing product in Western nations such as Canada or the US, even Europe, are significantly lower than that of product produced in a place like China, where environmental protections are non-existent, right? Companies can do whatever they want. Your power at that facility can be entirely powered by a coal furnace within the facility itself, right? You don't even need to rely on your city or your state power grid. You could just produce your own power, which is kind of insane for us here to think about, right? Like, we think of environmentalism and like, yeah, we don't want coal plants producing power for major cities and whatnot. Well, you can go to China where there is like literally a factory with its own coal furnace producing its own energy as much as they want, right? Which is absolutely insane. But it's just insane. And then further to that, there's also the idea of the Labor Standards Act, which in the U.S., and we have equivalent legislation here in Canada, that basically ensures that employees are protected from these unfair labor environments, unsafe environments, work hour limitations and whatnot. All of these things that lead directly to things like mental illness, depression, suicide, child deaths, right? Like child labor laws that we have here that they do not have in places like China. And like child mortality because these kids are poor, abandoned by their parents, need a job, and they're like, great, you get to work in the coal furnace, and then you have a 6-year-old shoveling coal, falling into the furnace and dying, like quite literally, right? These are actual things that happen that if you're buying goods from a place like China, it's what you're encouraging. Now, we don't see it, right? The idea of like the sweatshop and whatnot, you buy your Air Jordans, which were produced in a Nike sweatshop, or your Apple phone. Shout out, by the way, to every company that makes cell phones except for Apple, because most of them have pivoted away from that. But it's just the reality, right? If you're using an iPhone, it's a sweatshop product. Like, that's the way that it is. It's why I really encourage to buy South Korean phones like Samsung and LG, because they don't do trade with China. They're not allowed to. But either way, these are the sort of things that we all need to think about, right? Because like Apple, California-based company, right? American company through and through, except no, it's not. They're designed here. They're assembled in the U.S., but they're not manufactured here, right? Most of the product is manufactured, all the glass, the casing, and whatnot is manufactured in China. And then basically the silicone parts are made in either Korea or like smaller countries around the world, India, Malaysia, maybe a little bit in the U.S. But it's really tough when you really start to get into like, how do I buy product that's just Canadian, right? It's kind of, for me, why I ended up making the decision, like, should I buy Canadian or do I want to mix in another country? And I made sure that the other country that I was getting product from is Honduras, and there's a few other countries that they can ship stuff from. I think Thailand is like one of my backup depots, basically, where they make shirts. Same quality, but it's not sweatshop. Like, I'm trying to avoid that as best I can. And these are things that we all really need to think about. And the final pro to buying product produced within your own country is the idea of a healthy economy. Now, this is where the conversation gets really interesting, because this is where, as we eventually get into the cons, there's actually a lot of different opinions here on what the impact to the economy is. Now, it's really easy for us to imagine what a healthy environment is like. Yeah, clean skies and whatever. But a healthy economy is really tough to measure. And that's kind of why there's this discrepancy, because we always hear that the market is growing bigger and bigger and bigger. But which means, they say we have a healthy economy, but like right now we technically have a healthy economy, but like a third of people have no jobs because of the pandemic. It's a very strange idea. So what I look to when it comes to a healthy economy, I'm not going based off of the stuff that I've read because I don't necessarily agree with those opinions. For a healthy economy, I look at first and foremost jobs, right? And if you're talking about producing jobs within your own country, obviously buying product from within your own country helps that because you're creating a job in manufacturing, you're creating a job in warehousing, and you're creating a few different jobs in delivery, right? Delivery from the manufacturing plant to the warehouse, from the warehouse to the delivery company, and then the delivery company to either a store or a door, store or front door, right? And then beyond that, like if you go deep within the supply chain, right? Like if you're buying Canadian produced cotton, which I'm sure exists, I have no idea. But then that's even more, right? Because then you have a cotton farm that's producing Canadian-made products to sell to a Canadian company to weave it into yarn or whatever string, I don't know what the hell it would be, and then, to eventually become a t-shirt. Like, you can go really deep and create a lot of jobs just by producing a t-shirt entirely within Canada or entirely within the United States. Further to that, when you suddenly start creating all of these jobs, right? For example, everyone knows I work as an accountant for a significant Canadian food distributor. Now, all of my money comes from a Canadian company which buys almost entirely Canadian. And then if I take my money and put it back into other Canadian companies, then the money stays here within Canada. So then if I go and buy a Canadian-made t-shirt, then my, $20-25 is entirely staying here. It's going to other Canadian employees. It's being reinvested in Canadian businesses, and it furthers your economy as opposed to buying outside of your nation. That's how I describe the healthy economy pro to buying within. Now we get to the cons. And the very first one is the controversial one. It's the negative impact to the economy that some research believes exists. It's really hard to prove one way or the other, but they say that it actually creates fewer jobs, that by expanding to allow companies to trade with you, it creates more jobs because it creates buyers and sellers at these companies who have to deal specifically with foreign companies. It can create night shifts for shipping and office shifts at night for buying and selling. It also expands warehousing and shipping within your country. So there is a report that if Biden was to scrap the Buy America executive order that was signed, as opposed to changing the name of it, it may have created 300,000 more jobs for the U.S. Now, I don't know that I buy that. I'm just going to be real about it. I don't know that I buy that you actually create jobs in your country by purchasing product from outside of your country. But either way, these are the cons that are generally kind of discussed. The second one is, in my opinion, absolutely ridiculous, but it's a con that all other nations use against us here in Canada, the US, and Mexico. So for those of you who may not know, we used to have NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico. Donald Trump scrapped it because a lot of automotive manufacturers didn't like it. And now we have the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. You may remember Donald Trump signed his name in all three spaces where Canada, the US, and Mexico, Justin Trudeau, Donald Trump, and whoever the hell the president of Mexico is, we're supposed to sign. And then he looked at Trudeau and said, "Where's the real one? I want to make sure I get my good signature there." And Trudeau looked at him and laughed and said, "We each get a copy." Hilarious moment. But anyways, the USMCA is our new free trade agreement, right? And essentially, like if you buy Laugh to Learn product and it's now actually it's produced in Canada if you buy from Canada. It's produced in the U.S. if you buy from the U.S. But beforehand, we only had a factory in the U.S. at the time. The Canadian factory just opened, as I said, February 2nd. But even still, if you bought American T-shirts, mugs, stickers, whatever product, you didn't pay. There's no foreign sales, like there's no tax for it to cross the border, which there normally would be. One of the only things that I've ever been taxed for by buying from the U.S. are computers. And I'm not sure if they still are. But just as an example, like you can go on Amazon and buy almost any American product and have it shipped over the border, and you're not paying a foreign tax on it, right? Because we have this agreement in place to allow that free trade between our countries. So I'm not really sure why I got onto that. Anyways, the second con, I have no idea why I started down that rabbit hole. The second con that our countries can, or that's used against our countries, is that we can afford what's referred to as stimulus leakage. So the idea being that I discuss as a pro is, I make my money from a Canadian company and I put my money back into a Canadian company, so it's reinvested in more Canadian companies and we grow that way. The idea is that right now, with the stimulus packages that have been distributed by both Canada and the U.S., that our countries are so wealthy in comparison to European countries, which is absolutely true. Like, you have to realize that the entire European market is like the third wealthiest market, especially now that the UK is gone, in the world, or maybe even fourth. And like Canada's like 6 out of every country separately, and when you combine the European countries, like we are right behind Europe, right? When you combine France and Germany, like Canada and Japan are almost larger economies than all of Europe, which is like really bad, right? It's really bad for those places. So what they say, European countries say, is that we have enough money that it's not a bad thing if our stimulus checks that come to our citizens, that get distributed to our citizens, leak out to other countries. So say the U.S., I think it was like $1.6 billion was the last stimulus. Well, their argument is if $1 billion stays in the U.S. and $600 million leaves the U.S., and when they say the U.S., it's more leaving North America, to go to places like Europe and Africa and South America and Asia, they say that that's a good thing, that the U.S. can afford to sort of help these other nations and their small businesses by ordering product from them. Now, it's an interesting argument. It's an interesting argument because if you're telling people that it's cheaper to buy American or buy Canadian, and it physically is cheaper to do so, then you're certainly going to be less inclined to pay more money to get product from Europe, the same item, right? If all things considered, like, yeah, Louis Vuitton, people are still going to want to buy from Italy or wherever the hell it comes from, right? It's still Louis Vuitton. Lamborghini, people are still going to want to buy that. Rolls-Royce, an English car, people are still going to want to buy that. But a piece of steel, lumber, like why would you buy lumber from Europe? You buy it from Canada if you're in the U.S., right? You buy lumber from Canada or from Alaska, right? Which is within the U.S., but you know what I'm saying. That's what you do. You don't order lumber from anywhere else because it's cheaper from here. We have more. Fresh water. You know where every country gets their fresh water? Right here in Ontario. And some from Michigan. But, like, we have more fresh water than everywhere in the world here in Ontario, and this is where all the freshwater companies are, and they sell their fresh water to the U.S. tax-free, right? And then if there's extra, they sell it to Europe, but it's more work to ship it overseas. So the same idea. You have all this stimulus money, and the European countries are saying, well, we want some of it instead of you giving it to your citizens, which, again, I completely disagree with. I think that, like, if you're getting stimulus money, you should be spending it on local businesses and helping other people around you who are maybe business owners that can't get a stimulus check, depending on where you live and how the program works. Well, go, buy lunch at a local restaurant and help them out as opposed to anything else. And the third con is that it's harder for others to access your goods. Now, this one is completely true because if, for example, with lumber, right? If Canada decided that, I guess lumber's a bad idea. Let's go with let's go with something like steel, right? Canada and the US had this big trade war because of steel. And basically, the US put a tariff on Canadian steel because they only wanted American companies to buy American steel. Now, the US had a lot of deals to sell steel to places in China, to companies in China. And basically what happened was it became more expensive to sell to China than to sell to a company in, say, Michigan. So they canceled the deals with the Chinese companies because the Michigan companies couldn't get steel over the border from Canada. And so what ends up happening is American companies are buying up all of the American steel, and China is trying to buy Canadian steel, but they're not allowed to, or it's even more expensive, so they don't want to. And Canadians don't want to sell it to China because there's no trade agreement in place for it. And so Canada started stockpiling steel, waiting for Donald Trump to finish having his temper tantrum. American companies like GM and Ford and whatever were buying steel up from other American companies, so it wasn't being distributed to China. And then there was a major product shortage coming out of China because they couldn't access foreign steel from the United States economy. So Canadian companies just stockpiled it, waiting to get a better deal when the U.S. market reopened. And American companies just bought from themselves. They paid a little bit more money, but it was cheaper still than buying it from China. So in the end, you literally ended up with a major shortage of product in China because of this. Even within Canada, there was a major shortage because companies were stockpiling steel because they knew the price was going to skyrocket when you could finally buy it from Canada. When American companies were finally allowed to buy steel again, Canadian companies were able to charge a lot more money for it. It ended up costing the American taxpayer more than had they never placed those tariffs on it, and Canadians made more money off of it, which means those companies paid more in taxes, and the Canadian government ended up profiting off of this, right? Because it does become harder for others to access your product if you cannot get that same product from elsewhere. You have to buy it from within your country, then you have to supply your country first. Now, I want to close with my opinion on this. Because what it comes down to for me is simple morality. So I am a person who is very publicly opposed to non-democratic nations. Like, I do my very best to never buy product from China. I'll never buy product from Cuba. I would certainly never buy product from North Korea. I don't even know if that exists. Further to that, there are some Venezuelan countries like Nicaragua and Venezuela that I avoid like the plague. I don't buy Russian products. Like, this is all stuff that I have morally seen these countries, these governments, and decided that I don't support them, and so I won't support them. It's nothing against the people, right? I really wish those people were free to vote, but they're not. And if you're not free to vote, then you can't have my dollar. I accidentally bought Chinese pens on Amazon like a year ago, and I'm still upset about it. I tell people about it all the time, and they're great pens. I'll say it. Fantastic pens, but I won't buy them anymore. I'm actually still using them. There's one right beside me. But I won't buy them anymore because I was like, shit, I accidentally bought Chinese pens. I thought they were... I actually thought they were from Taiwan, which is technically China, but they don't. It's complicated. I support free and independent Taiwan. But it really comes down to your own morality on this. As I was saying, I don't support certain countries. I will not buy from certain countries. But when it came to my T-shirt business, I was looking at the company that produces those T-shirts, and I decided, okay, they're produced in Honduras. Is it a democratic government? Yes, it is. I looked it up, started reading about it, and I ultimately decided, my T-shirt's supporting a fair wage-paying company in Honduras, as well as a Canadian-based printing company, I can get behind that. To me, it doesn't have to be entirely made here, as long as it's only supporting companies and individuals that I believe morally have good intentions and intentions that align with my own, right? Like, and then further to that, this week talking about my brother and my sister-in-law's company, A1 Baby, they are doing entirely by Canadian. They did a test run where they ordered their product and stuff, and they got it in, and it was supposed to be Canadian t-shirts, and they weren't. And then they had to basically restart this whole process of finding a supplier with good quality shirts and stuff that were consistently produced in Canada, and it was a big deal for them. Well, I can completely understand that. Buy Canada, buy America. I completely support that, because it's not our job to support the European economy, right? It's simply not. I love visiting Europe. It's a fantastic place to go, awesome people, but much like it's not my job to support the American economy, right? I buy at local restaurants here. My print shop is set up in Mississauga, just a few hours from here in Ontario, and to me, that's doing my part to support my economy. And if I do buy a product that I really like, and it's a European product or a Honduras product or whatever, and it's from a democratic nation, and I'm like, you know what, it's cool, it's not overpriced for shipping and whatnot, I'm down with it. But I have no problem 100% buying local, because what it comes down to is it's my money, right? It's my money. And if you say man, I support, which I have a friend who's had this conversation with me, and he actually said 100% I support the Chinese communist regime. I think they are the best, I'm not even going to say it, but you know what I mean. He went down that road, and he buys a lot of stuff from China, and he really supports it. White dude too, not born in China, no Chinese family. I basically said man, that is your right. Good for you that you've done your research or whatever, and that's the conclusion you came to. But for me, I simply put my money towards only countries that I believe deserve to be where they are in existence. Let's just put it that way, right? There are certain countries that I will never buy anything from, and that's just myself. Now, when it comes to legislation, I think that especially right now, when a country's giving out stimulus packages and COVID checks, basically, if you will, at that point in time, I think absolutely you should have protections put in place so that the money is staying within Canada or within the U.S. Because we aren't buying out the European government. We're not buying out the Brazilian government or the South African government or the Chinese or the Japanese government. This money is for our own citizens to get back on their feet. And if you go to a grocery store that's owned by a Chinese corporation, then the money is not staying here, right? The money is going back overseas, and you're not helping our citizens, right? You should be shopping at Canadian stores, Canadian markets, Canadian, eating at Canadian restaurants with that money. I have no issue with that. So in conclusion, I am supportive of the buy local policies. And when it comes to buying foreign product, I'm not against it. But personally, I do my research into the country first. I kind of have a list in my head of countries that I don't buy product from. And I just stick to that. Once again, this week we are sponsored by A1 Baby, launching within the next few weeks. A1 Baby, that's EHONE Baby. It is going to be the trendiest place to get your babies all Canadian made clothing. My niece looks adorable in her outfits already, and there's no reason your child or your friend's child, or of course your aunt's child, shouldn't be too. A1 Baby is coming soon. Be sure to follow them on social media for updates. Thank you all so much for listening. I really encourage you to take these discussions with your friends or with me over on social media. Please share the podcast with your friends and family and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, friends, of course, you know what to do. Keep social distancing, washing those hands, buying local, wearing those masks, buying Canadian masks maybe. Keep on laughing and keep on learning.